Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. Join us on the journey to financial success. Let's go. So today's episode is titled The Relationship Between Employment Rates and Housing Demand. And why I actually thought it would be helpful to address this topic is because there is obviously a tendency when we're talking about investing and real estate investing and finding the right property and finding the right funding and getting the best rates and so forth, that the aspect that is ultimately going to generate the income and repay the mortgage can sometimes be a little bit forgotten. And I don't mean that we forget that we have tenants, but I mean that we are forgetting the life of the tenant. And when you think about the cost of living these days, which is in the news on a regular basis, one of the struggles is that, number one, a lot of people can't really afford, if they ever wanted to, own the average house in the United States. And I know it's a little bit skewed when you take those numbers or that argument, because that average house is obviously including prices from the really expensive areas in the country as well as the much more affordable areas in the country. But that average price is now somewhere in the $420,000 to $450,000, right? So now, does every house that exists in the area where you live cost $400,000 or $500,000? No, probably not. But on the other hand, the number of houses who are above that price is constantly increasing, and the number of houses that you can find for something like between $200,000 and $300,000 is rapidly decreasing, partially because of inflation, but also for other reasons. Now, if you turn that around and say, okay, let's just take a quick example for a house that you get into where you pay $200,000 and you have 8% interest, just as an example, meaning 7% interest and round about 1% for principal, so 8% total, right? That's $16,000 per year, and you would have to pay that divided by 12, right? So that's just the mortgage payment without homeowners insurance, without property taxes or anything like that, right? So very rapidly for a house like that, you have costs of $2,000 a month. And when you think about the fact that most experts recommend that you shouldn't have more than about 30 to 40% for housing as your expense from your salary, so you can still have a car and you can still, have food and still go on vacation and do the normal things that are part of life. Well, if you go then with 40% and let's say $2,000, you basically need to make $5,000 net per month. And that oftentimes means to get there, both partners have to work. So now if we go back to the title of our episode and ask ourselves, okay, so what does employment rate have to do with this context? Well, if employment is going down, meaning like companies, for example, are reducing overtime, companies are reducing shifts, companies, like I know, for example, in some manufacturing areas throughout the country, they're basically giving the whole Memorial Day week off or the whole 4th of July week off and so forth, not because they're suddenly so generous, but because they don't have enough demand and they don't want to fire people, always hoping that the demand for the product that is being created is coming back. Now, that is obviously not a long-term solution, but what that also means is if you can't get any overtime pay anymore, if instead of two partners working, only one partner has a steady income, then not only is it virtually impossible for someone living that way to become a homeowner, it is also tricky to pay the rent. Now, the rent is typically not as much as costly as if you pay everything that we pay as owners, especially when you consider that, the prices for rental properties are typically lower from a per unit perspective than something that you would buy for yourself. But I wanted to illustrate how important it is that we become aware, number one, what is the life and the affordability for our tenants And at the same time, number two is, what is the economic situation in our area where we invest? And don't forget, yes, we're always speaking about the fact that really the money in a deal is made at purchase at the very beginning, right? In the right area, with the right school district, with the right economy, with the right kind of purchasing power for the tenants, with good transportation, all these criteria we want to take into consideration to decide which property are we going to purchase. But then you shouldn't forget that over time, and I have properties that I purchased almost 10 years ago. Actually, I have one that is 20 years ago. And those properties, the environment, the economic environment is changing, right? There might be, in ideal cases, more businesses moving into an area. And something that may not have been that developed is actually developing. I just saw, for example, one little note in the media where Dayton Airport, which is really not a big international airport or anything like that, has attracted a company that is developing a new kind of airplane. Right, and so they're going to have the runway there to do some early tests and taxiing and stuff like that. But more importantly, right next to the main airport buildings, they have basically set up their shop, and they're going to have jobs, and they're going to try to manufacture these planes and test them and so forth. So that's an additional manufacturer coming into the area. Or some locations where you may be invested have gotten like an Amazon distribution center or some new manufacturing. But then also keep in mind the opposite could be true as well, where a company that a lot of people were employed at and gotten the money so they can pay your rent may be reducing or may even be closing outright. So the awareness of the life of the tenant and their financial strength is what I meant by the impact and relationship of employment rates. Because if employment rate in your area goes down, you can already start anticipating that you might have issues with dependable monthly steady rent payments. So I hope this was informative. Keep in mind that I would love for you to become a paid subscriber so you get all our awesome content and access to our freebies. And that's it for today. Be well and stay safe, and I talk to you tomorrow.